All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for being here and for introducing yourselves in the chat. My name is Brennison Wheeler. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Community Education and Outreach Manager at Women's Advocates, which is a nonprofit organization located in St. Paul, Minnesota. And we offer a continuum of safety through our prevention programming, such as these webinars, emergency shelter, and aftercare housing support for victim survivors of domestic violence. Just a few quick reminders and announcements. We will be sending out a follow-up email that will include a link of the recording of the webinar, a PDF of the PowerPoint slides, and information on how to request and receive a certificate of attendance. And before we officially dive into today's webinar, I do want to acknowledge and extend gratitude for our American Sign Language or ASL interpretation services, which are provided by Think Self Minnesota Deaf Education and Advocacy's Specialized Interpreting Fellowship Training Program, or SIFT. So continue to introduce yourselves in the chat. I'm really enjoying reading everyone's introductions and some of the things that they do to take care of their mental health wellness. We'll first kind of start with a few disclaimers and also an invitation to connect to the breath. So if you're familiar with box breathing, you can take a moment to count to 4 on your inhales and hold for 4, and exhale for another 4 and hold for another 4, and repeat that cycle if you would like. Otherwise, you can bring conscious awareness to your current breath as it is in its natural state, just feeling your feet on the ground or wherever they are, just noticing where you are in space and also where your mind and your energy might be at as well. So some disclaimers about this panel event include that it's not necessarily intended to be completely comprehensive. So there's a lot to talk about when it comes to therapy, and it cannot all be covered in just 90 minutes. So we wanted to name that right off the bat. And then we also wanted to include that we might not have time to answer every question, but we do fully encourage all of you to submit questions to the Q&A. That would be the best way for us to make sure that we get to them, because we will have some audience engagement opportunities via the chat. So sometimes the questions can get a little lost in that. And then our therapists on this panel are limited to sharing their own experiences, their own opinions and perspectives. So we just, again, wanted to name that it's not intended that it's generalized to represent all therapists or the mental health field itself. You're getting really particular perspectives from our panelists. And then again, it's intended to be the supportive starting point for people who might be newer or need a little refresher on navigating mental health support, and also for people who are interested in supporting others in their lives in that journey. We also wanted to name that therapy might not be for everyone. So this will be, just one option for mental health support among many others. So it might not be the best fit for everyone. And so keeping that in mind is important. And then again, with our differing opinions, if you have a different opinion than is shared on this panel, that is 100% valid, and we would invite you to share your own opinion or share a resource, of course, always in a respectful, kind manner. Anything that you want to add to these disclaimers, Kayla?
I think that pretty much covers it. Thank you.
Great. So this is the agenda for the webinar. And so for the next 90 minutes, you'll kind of see we have divided the kind of different topics into these different themes. And so we'll talk about kind of what is therapy, why someone might consider trying therapy, how to start navigating mental health support systems, and how to do the work and how to make the most of therapy. And then we'll have an opportunity for any final questions and other resources that others might want to share with everyone. Okay, so we'll first start with meeting the panelists, and I am noticing that our second panelist hasn't signed on yet, and I haven't heard from her. So hopefully she will log on soon. If not, I will do my best, knowing that I am not a therapist. I am an aspiring psychologist. So if that is an interesting perspective that anyone wants to hear, I might interject if we don't have Hafia join. But we'll start with Kayla kind of introducing yourself and why you feel it's important to talk about therapy.
Yeah, thank you. I'm happy to be here today. My name is Kayla Marcoux. I'm a mental health practitioner at Face to Face, which is a nonprofit in St. Paul. We do mental health care, medical care, case management, housing support, other support for homeless youth, and we serve youth ages 11 to 24, 25 sometimes. Yeah, so I specialize in working with youth and young adults. I have prior experience working in schools. I did children's mental health case management through Ramsey County, did some stuff in early childhood education, and currently I'm providing outpatient therapy at Face to Face. And yeah, that my bio kind of says a little bit about my approach to therapy. I like to kind of integrate some cognitive behavioral, acceptance and commitment therapy, mindfulness approaches. I also would consider myself to be a little bit more of an informal therapist. I like to utilize humor when it's appropriate and connect with clients about, shared interests and hobbies. And I think that's especially important when working with youth. And yeah, I have a lot of experience working with clients with a wide range of concerns, lots of trauma, complex family dynamics, life transition, substance use, gender and sexual identity, anxiety, depression, grief, to name a few. Yeah, I'm happy to be here today and share my perspective. I feel like it's very important to talk about therapy and normalize it. And there's, can be a lot of misconceptions or just questions, and people don't always know where to go to get those answered. So yeah, happy to be here to offer what I can.
Thanks, Kayla. And I noticed that we have an attendee raising their hand. So I just want to invite you to type in the chat or use the Q&A. But if you would like to be unmuted to ask a question, you can indicate that via the chat and then we can do that. Sometimes it's an accident too. So I don't want to unmute you or request that if you accidentally click that button. So just let us know. Okay, so the next thing that we have is an invitation for you all to share with us what comes to mind when you think of therapy. So there are two different ways that you can access this poll. So one of them is by using your phone or any device with a camera to scan the QR code on the screen. The other is to click on the link that I just sent in the chat. So I'll give you all a moment for that. And you can submit up to 10 different words. You can fill in the blank for therapy is, therapy offers, I feel blank when thinking about trying therapy. Therapy is a space for blank. Therapy is believed to be blank in my community. So anything around that. I think it's sometimes really helpful to have a visualization of what everyone's current conception or hopes are for what therapy is or what it means to them coming into the space. So I will share that screen here so everyone can see. And the cool thing about Menti is that as a word is sent repeatedly, it gets larger. So we'll see if we have some common words that are sent in. But right now I'm seeing safe place, a way to talk things out. It can be hard to find. Validation, helpful, it's a process, transformative, healing. It can be expensive, having privacy, personal, soothing, healing and growth and helpful are getting larger by the second here. Is anything else standing out to you, Kayla, on this word cloud?
Yeah, there's lots of different stuff that's coming up here. I noticed too that there's some, triggering, stressful, tiring. Those things are all true. There's a lot of amazing positive things that come out of therapy, but it is also a very vulnerable process. So I'm glad that people are mentioning that too, and normalizing those hard parts of therapy. And it is cool to see too, though, that the with those hard parts, the words that are showing up the largest are, healing and growth and helpful. So, yeah.
Great. Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for contributing. You can continue to do so. We will, as you think of new things potentially, but we will continue with the slides here and get into the first theme. So, the first theme is, what is therapy? What is this word that we keep saying? You came to talk about therapy, so let's do it. So, one of the first things that we wanted to talk about is this idea of supporting our own mental health and what it really means to someone. And so, this is from a Black female therapist. A lot of these resources that I'm going to share on the slides are directly from that account. So, I 100% recommend that you follow that account. But for the person who runs that account, she wrote about an opportunity to protect your energy, express your needs, live your life based on your personal values, create and maintain healthy, fulfilling relationships, enjoy life, laugh, and have fun. Adapt to change and discomfort, be accountable for one's actions, manage one's emotions, and know how to cope when triggered, and know when to ask for help and know when to accept help. I think that last part is something that's really big for me personally, is also being able to accept that help. I think sometimes that can be a barrier for people in even seeking therapeutic support, because maybe they've always been the giver, they've always been the person that everyone else has leaned on, and it can be really difficult to allow yourself to receive that from someone else. So supporting your own mental health doesn't only just mean going to therapy. There's a lot of other ways to achieve these things on the screen, but therapy is one of those avenues. And so, with that, in therapy, there are some questions that can be quote unquote answered or explored in a therapy setting and a process. So, not just one time in 160 minutes, you'll know the answer to why someone can never say no, but you can start to unpack that and explore it more. So, if you found yourself ever asking these questions or anything like these questions on the screen, know that A, you're not alone, and B, that therapy can provide a space for really processing and having a deeper understanding of these different questions and other things that you might be experiencing in your life. And a lot of it might be patterns or exploring things that have happened in your childhood, or thought processes, different levels of cognition and things that are going on, maybe your culture, how everything that makes you uniquely you and all the experiences that you have had contribute to why you might be asking yourself some of these questions. Anything you want to add to that, Kayla?
Yeah, I just think that, really there's no right or wrong reason to seek therapy. And I think, sometimes people question, like, are things bad enough, or do I really need this, or they really think that there has to be some specific, really maybe intense thing happening to seek therapy or to qualify. And there's really no such thing as a qualifier. You just to be willing, and just have stuff that you want to talk about. And all of these questions are really important things to explore.
Thanks, Kayla. Yeah, and if you've never asked yourself any of these questions, it definitely doesn't mean that you shouldn't go to therapy or anything like that. It just might mean that the things that you might be asking or wondering or wanting to work on just aren't on the screen. And so we also wanted to talk about how real it is when people are talking about it can be challenging, it can be confusing, it can be hard to find. And one of the reasons is that there are a lot of different acronyms. There are a lot of different licensing and trying to figure out the best fit or who is a therapist, what does it mean to be a therapist, what was their training like, is there a better I get questions too of like, oh, is it better to see someone who's a psychologist versus someone who is a social worker? And so these are just some of the different licensing. Specifically in Minnesota, there are pretty, I don't want to say they're universal, but you'll probably find a lot of these licensings in other states in the United States as well. If you're outside the US, I would highly encourage you to kind of look up what that is like for your unique country and region. But these are just to get us started. We'll kind of go through a little bit. And I know that Kayla will speak specifically to the licensing and some of the education that she has received to provide some clarity on that. And then anything else that you want to speak to, you definitely can.
Yeah, so it's definitely can be really confusing. All of these letters, it's like alphabet soup. I remember when I was just, trying to decide what I wanted to go to school for, and it was very confusing, all of these different avenues and kind of ways to go with it. Um, and basically, these are all just different kind of pathways to be able to do therapy. And they're each a little bit different, but, lots of overlaps. Licensed alcohol and drug counselor, that one's obviously a little more specific and will have, a lot of specific education and training in that area. But the other ones will also, cover training in alcohol and drug counseling, marriage and family therapy, um, has a little bit more training specifically around marriage and family therapy in addition to individual. And then the licensed professional counselor and licensed professional clinical counselor is another one. And then, licensed independent clinical social worker. So that is what I am going towards. I'm currently a licensed graduate social worker. So that just means that I have my master's degree in social work, and I am currently finishing up with the 2 years of clinical supervision that I need in order to become an independent clinical social worker. And then once I am an independent clinical social worker, I can practice independently and bill by myself and all of that kind of stuff. And currently I'm doing that underneath a supervisor, and all the rest of, the marriage and family therapy and the professional counselor, they have similar things where there's kind of like an associate licensure before you kind of get that independent licensure. And so that's something that's, important to just note, that somebody who is under supervision is going to, not be somebody who has quite as much experience as somebody who is fully independently licensed, but that they are working underneath supervision, and it's usually it's weekly supervision that you're getting. And so that is just something to know, and that should be something too that they should disclose and explain to you. And sometimes too, you will come across, like at face to face, we have interns who are people who are in graduate school still, and they are also being supervised by a independent practitioner, and they don't have any licensure of any kind, but they are in school, and so they would disclose that to you as well, that they are an intern. And that's something then that you could decide whether or not you're comfortable with. And yeah, the one other one, I guess, that I would be like a licensed psychologist, who they can do therapy too, but they also sometimes will focus more on like testing and things like that. So yeah, I would just encourage people to ask if you come across, letters that are confusing, because sometimes you'll see more letters in there too that will include different certifications that people have, or like before my name, when it says LGSW, I have MSW, so that just means Masters in Social Work. Sometimes people have MA, Masters of Arts, or what have you. So I would just encourage you to ask, and yeah.
Thank you for that, Kayla. And yeah, the website on the screen has a more in-depth description of all those things too, if you're really interested in the different educational backgrounds, and know that each kind of program can definitely be different as well too. Great. Yeah, I'm seeing there's some questions in the chat about the difference between an LPC and an LPCC. And I'm not the expert on that, but Kayla, if you do want to talk about that, and I know you touched on LICSW versus LGSW.
Yeah, so for the LPC versus the LPCC, I'm pretty positive that for that one, that's pretty, like, it's kind of the equivalent to like the LGSW, LICSW situation. When there's that extra C in there for the LPCC, that's, you really have that clinical focus, and then are able to kind of be practicing independently at that point. And then that is also the difference with the licensed graduate social worker versus the licensed independent clinical social worker. And sometimes too, people don't ever get that full independent licensure. They just choose not to, and they just remain under supervision. But oftentimes somebody is working towards the full independent licensure. And for like the marriage and family therapy, sometimes you'll see it where it says LAMFT, and that's like licensed associate marriage and family therapist, and that's kind of the same deal there. I saw another question in the chat too about somebody asking about eventually wanting to obtain a license for social work. They do have bachelor's programs for social work, which is great because there is a bachelor's level licensure for social work, and that would just be called, it would be like your LSW, licensed social worker. There are some things that you can do with that bachelor's level licensure, skills, training, different kinds of case management, things in the county, things like that. And then that would, if you were to do that would, and then eventually wanted to get a master's degree, you'd be able to do like a advanced standing program, and we would be able to finish it a little bit faster. But also you can have a bachelor's degree in lots of other fields and go on to get a master's in social work or any of these other things. I had my bachelor's degree was in psychology, and then I went on to get my master's in social work, and I had classmates who had bachelor's degrees in accounting and lots of different things, and that then led them to social work. So
Thanks, Kayla. So yeah, and that's definitely something you can also ask about during your consultation meeting of like, what do these letters mean, and how has your kind of licensing or education kind of equipped you to help with the things that I'm hoping to work on. So if you want it to be a little more personalized too, you can always ask them that question. Okay, so and kind of setting the stage for what is therapy, we do have about 3 more slides. So one of them is about these common misconceptions about what therapy is. So Kayla, do any of these on the screen resonate with you, or are anything that you kind of really want to make sure that you debunk and provide some more context about?
yeah, definitely, these are all misconceptions that I've heard of. One I think that's big that can be confusing too is the one that says psychotherapists can prescribe medication. That's understandably pretty confusing just because people use those words interchangeably, and sometimes psychiatrists who can prescribe medication will also do a little bit of psychotherapy. Typically, they just stick to prescribing medication, but yeah, a psychotherapist, even if it's a psychologist who would be someone that has a doctorate, it's not a doctorate in medicine, so they cannot prescribe medication. And then lots of other therapists have master's degrees and so are not doctors. So somebody who would be able to prescribe medication would be a psychiatrist, or like a psychiatric nurse practitioner, or somebody with an advanced medical degree. Yeah, some of these other ones, like the psychotherapists believe that personality is cemented by age 5. There's a lot of sort of, things that were commonly held beliefs a long time ago. You'll hear about like Freud and these different things, and it'll, there was another one on there, like blame the client's problems on their upbringing. There used to be a lot more focus on that kind of stuff than there is now, and I think, yeah, that's just important to know that today, we in therapy, we're all about, that we can all grow and change and learn, and we're not there to pick apart your past and blame things on your parents or things that happened when you were little. And that's stuff to help explain and inform and help contextualize things that are going on, but not to blame ever. And yeah, the one with the couch is kind of funny. I don't know that I've ever seen anybody lying on a couch for therapy. Actually, maybe one of my youth clients have, just because they wanted to lay down, but definitely not like how you see in the movies or anything. So
Yeah, I definitely want to emphasize that first bullet, that it's absolutely not true that people who seek psychotherapy or therapy or any other forms are weak or have to be mentally ill or crazy. I really don't like that word either of how it's used. Um, but I think that that is a huge misconception too. And we'll talk about that more later and how people respond to others when they learn that they might be in therapy. And that really reveals those misconceptions where people have this idea of there's one or two types of people who seek therapy. And if you don't fall into those two of like they have a mental health diagnosis like anxiety, depression, PTSD, bipolar, any of those, um, or trauma or anything, they'll wonder like, oh well, why would you do that? Why would you need that if you haven't had XYZ experiences that I commonly associate with therapy? And so I personally believe that it is a great strength to be able to seek those services and get the support that will help you lead a life that you want and that you love and that makes you happy, and all of those things too. And so if there's any others or things that you're not sure if it's a misconception, if there's truth to it or not, feel free to send it in the chat and we can talk about it more too. But that's just a little bit about what therapy isn't, even though it might be commonly believed. Okay. So now, Kayla mentioned earlier that there might be some specialty areas, and she specializes with youth and young adults. And so it might be population wise, or it might be other specialty areas in terms of experiences or things that clients might be experiencing. And so you'll see a long, long list. This is from Psychology Today. When you go to toggle all of their different specialties and find the therapist, these are the ones that they list. And so there are definitely a lot of other ones too, but these are some of the main ones that have been categorized on that site. Is there anything that you want to add kind of about these specialty areas or what it might mean for a therapist to add one of these as something that they specialize in?
yeah, I think that it's also important to note that just, if a therapist doesn't have something listed like in their specialties, that doesn't necessarily mean they don't have experience in that area, but just maybe wouldn't say that that's something that's one of their like main focuses. And some therapists are more kind of generalists, which is sort of where I'm at right now in my career. And then over time, either they'll stay kind of generalists and kind of see people with a lot of different areas, or over time they will sort of find a niche or something that they're really, really focusing on and specializing in. And so, yeah, that's something when you're searching to look for a therapist, typing in kind of keywords can be helpful. And just asking too when you do a consultation, or if you're talking to the referral specialist at a place, just asking, is this something that this therapist specializes in, or is this something that this therapist feels competent in? Because you wouldn't want, if you had something going on that was pretty specific, let's say an eating disorder or hoarding or some of the different ones on here, you might not want to see a therapist who would not answer, yes, I feel competent in that, like they have no experience or very little. And so, yeah, that, I guess that is maybe one difference, is just like feeling competent versus it being like a specialty. And a specialty then would be, yeah, that you see mostly patients with or clients with those concerns going on. And yeah, there's lots of different ones.
Thank you, Kayla. And then another option, another kind of choice you can toggle in the search function of those directories are different therapeutic approaches. So once you kind of learn more about yourself and maybe what works and what doesn't work, what might resonate with you in terms of certain approaches, that's when you might Google some of these and learn, okay, what does it mean if a therapist says that they do ACT, like acceptance or ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy? Or what does it mean if it's, or I'm really interested in mindfulness or yoga? I want to find a therapist that integrates that into what they do. Or maybe if it's something you're looking for your children, maybe play therapy. So there's a lot of different therapeutic approaches and ways of thinking about therapy, engaging in therapy, incorporating different strategies and techniques into that session. And I did also write at the top here that this can be an individual therapy, couples therapy, family therapy. There's also therapy groups, which are often different than support groups because there's usually a treatment element aspect to it. So if you know that you don't think one-on-one would be helpful, but you learn so much by engaging with other people and hearing about their stories and connecting with others in that way, that might be an option for you. So Kayla, if you want to expand on some of the ones that you've integrated into your practice, or ones that you're interested in learning more about, or others that have worked well with some of your colleagues, anything like that, feel free.
Yeah. So I think that in my bio, I kind of mentioned that I tend to incorporate some cognitive behavioral and acceptance and commitment and mindfulness modalities. And cognitive behavioral therapy and acceptance and commitment therapy are sort of like cousins, maybe. Cognitive behavioral therapy is, will kind of work with identifying thought patterns and maybe negative beliefs that you're holding about yourself or about the world, and working on identifying those things and challenging them when they're appropriate. Acceptance and commitment therapy also kind of works with that, but what I really like about that is it kind of incorporates some mindfulness aspects and acceptance, like is in the title, by saying that we can identify these thought patterns and we can remind ourselves that they don't need to have so much power over us. We can, maybe rather than trying to challenge or get rid of a belief, we can accept that we're having this thought and we can move on, and we don't need to let it have so much power over us. And the commitment part of that is committed action to living by values that are important to you. And then mindfulness is, yeah, just focusing on being present in the moment and practicing mindful meditation can be really helpful. I'll help clients sometimes with learning about that if they're interested. Doing breath work and grounding things and different things to kind of help engage in the present. And that's really helpful, I feel, because a lot of things that we struggle with are when we are not in the present moment. We're either worrying about the future, which is kind of like anxiety stuff, or we're ruminating on the past, which can be a little more depression related. So yeah, that's why I really like mindfulness. And yeah, there's so many different approaches. I have colleagues that do some internal family system stuff, which is cool. And I think, yeah, something that's just helpful to know too is that usually these approaches are kind of just, it's like a way of thinking about it. But most therapists, leave room for interpretation and for what fits best for the client, instead of trying to, make the approach fit the client. You want to, find an approach that works best for the client. So
Yeah, definitely no like cookie cutter for any of these different approaches too of one size fits all. So thank you. And we did just hear a word from Hafia. Life of the therapist is sometimes some things come up with a client. And so if that gets resolved soon, we might have Hafia join us. So just letting you all know about that. In the meantime, we're curious for you all to write in the chat what therapy means to you or what you would want therapy to mean to you. So, I know when I was first thinking about going to therapy in college, I wanted it to be a lot of the things that people wrote in the word cloud is a space for healing, a space for processing, a space for support, and dedicated time for figuring out who I am. And a big idea for me was a sense of wholeness, of like feeling really integrated and really connected to everything that has happened, that I want to happen, who I am in that moment, instead of feeling very fragmented, which led to a lot of feelings of feeling stuck, not sure what to do, and all of these things that caused a lot of distress in my life too. And other experiences that were traumatic, and kind of working through those and learning more about my window of tolerance and lots of different things too. And so we're interested if you would like to share in the chat. If not, that's totally okay. Other than that, um, okay, so some people are sending in the chat. A lot of them are sent to just the panelists. So that's why you might not be able to see them in the chat. But therapy means to someone in the chat to be present for another human being, full attention and intuition, listening and understanding what the other person is disclosing, letting it out and letting it go. That's what therapy can mean for someone. Yeah, absolutely. Well, you can continue to think about that. And if you'd like to share any more, you can send it in the chat. But we'll officially dive into the questions here. That first, not every beginning section will be about that, but I know that that's kind of the bulk of it, is what even is therapy, before we kind of get into it. So we'll explore some of these questions on the screen. We might not get to all of them. But one that might be great to start out with, Kayla, is how you would describe therapy to someone who's never been to therapy before.
yeah, I would describe it as a place where you can feel safe to explore and talk about lots of different things that are going on in your life currently, stressful things, happy things, emotional things, or things that have happened in the past that you're still kind of working through. It can also be a place where you can work on relationships with other people, like in family therapy or in couples therapy. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then maybe we can touch just a little bit on navigating some barriers for people for seeking therapeutic support.
Yeah, there definitely can be a lot of barriers, and including internal barriers, just with feeling having trouble with opening up or trusting, which is super common and makes a lot of sense, and struggling with being vulnerable. That I think can be navigated by being honest with the therapist and just letting them know that it's hard for you to open up, and that you're gonna need to maybe go slow in the beginning, and that can be really helpful then for the therapist to know, just um, to try to work with you at your own pace then. And I always like to tell clients, even in that initial intake session where you are kind of exploring really like some history and all that kind of stuff, I always like to tell people, if there's any questions that I ask that you don't want to answer, you don't have to. And so that's something to know too, is that if that's a barrier for you, you don't need to feel like um, that you just have to open up and spill everything right away. There are other barriers, that can include like financial barriers, which is a really, really real one. Not all therapists accept insurance for various reasons. Sometimes insurance can have really high deductibles, which make it difficult. So with navigating that, it's also important to just ask the particular agency or therapist that you're seeing, what are some ways that they can work with you with that. Sometimes therapists, if they don't accept insurance, or even if they do, they'll offer like a sliding scale where that's kind of like income based then. And if you have a really high deductible, sometimes too, you can waive your using your insurance and do the sliding scale instead. Um, and then yeah, otherwise, finding a place that does accept your insurance, or places like Face to Face, where we take clients who do not have insurance as well, and we offer sliding scale and kind of like low flat rate fees. And we always tell clients, like, we never would send anybody to collections or anything like that. And so there are places that you can go to that will work with you with those financial barriers too.
Yeah, I would definitely add that psychoeducation and resources can be a huge way of being able to navigate a lot of those different barriers. So even if the barrier is, my family won't understand that I'm on their insurance or all those other things, there's a lot of different guides, and we linked a lot of them on the slides too, where you can kind of work through different techniques of navigating all of those different situations too. And then moving on to the next question, we'll kind of group all of these together, if that's okay with you, Kayla, in terms of what are your therapy sessions like? And I know that's a very broad, general question, and all of them are definitely different. But if there's anything about that you want to share in terms of what might happen during a typical therapy session, maybe the different lengths of them, maybe how often someone will go while they're seeking therapy, whether that's every week, every 2 weeks, every month, how long someone might see a therapist, and any opinions or perspectives that you'd like to share about any of those.
Yeah, I would say that my typical therapy sessions are probably um, 45 to 55 minutes. Sometimes, can go right up to an hour, depending on if there's a lot happening in that session. Sometimes with, especially maybe like the younger kiddos, it might even be closer to 30 minutes, just especially with right now with like telehealth. Sometimes the younger ones have trouble just being focused for that long, which is totally understandable. Um, yeah, I, typically just start with kind of asking clients how their week has been going, and if that, leads into talking about different stressors and things going on. And then usually over time, we'll kind of identify patterns and make connections, to things that happen in the past. I always, will ask clients, like, is there anything specific that would be helpful to talk about this session? So in case, because sometimes clients will come in with like, I really want to spend this time talking about my relationship with my sister, or, XYZ. So it doesn't always need to be just what's going on right now in the week. Or um, and then I would say that most often people start with coming weekly and then kind of adjust from there. If it feels like maybe they're coming and they're not having as much stuff to talk about, then we'll maybe go down to every other week. Sometimes people will come once a month, or I have, clients that at this point now will just every once in a while just text and just be like, can we have a session? And it'll only happen, a couple of times a year. But I would say, yeah, most often is weekly to start out with, unless you want it to be different. Because again, sometimes people will do less frequently than that to help with like the financial piece of that. Yeah, do I want to answer that next one too about the training, or did we kind of cover that with
Yeah, I
the
think we kind of
license stuff?
covered that with the
Okay.
licensing earlier, unless there's anything else that you thought of in the meantime. But otherwise, you can talk about maybe provide perspective of what it might be like to be a client in a therapy setting. And then maybe for you, what being a therapist has been like. Because I know a lot of people want to ask their therapist that question, or like ask them how they're doing, or like, do you ever get stressed too? Or are you receiving support for everything that you are um involved in or experiencing or witnessing or hearing about? So anything that you'd like to share about that?
hmm Yeah. Well, and something too that we talked a lot about when I was in grad school is that, there's a lot of people who feel that to be a therapist, it's important for you to have been in therapy at some point to, to just do, that kind of work on yourself, and B, so that you know how that feels to be on the other side of it. And so I have been in therapy at different points in my life. And, I can tell you that there's been times where it's felt a little awkward or vulnerable or uncomfortable. Um, you know, Sometimes you'll see someone and you're like, maybe this isn't the best fit. But I've also had, then found a really, really great therapist who I saw off and on for several years, and that felt really supportive and nurturing and valuable. And it was a person that, I knew I could come and talk to about anything, and there would not be any judgment, and that it wouldn't be somebody who has, stake in the things that are going on, like maybe family members or friends. Um, and as far as being a therapist, it's really an honor to um, walk alongside people and to be a witness in their journey. um, it feels really powerful, and yeah, it is always appreciated when clients do ask about how you're doing, but we never want the focus to be on us as the therapist. um, but it is certainly important to have your own spaces as a therapist to get support from other therapists or from supervisors to talk about things maybe that have come up in sessions, because it can be heavy to, bear witness to um, people's pain or trauma. And yeah, it can be a lot. So it's important to have outlets for that. But it is, it's very powerful. And, that's why I do this work, because it's very meaningful.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. So we'll move on to the next section. We're a little behind schedule, which is totally fine, but we won't spend too much time on these next few slides. We'll probably focus a little bit more on the questions, but these are some reasons why people might consider trying therapy. So again, in line with the thinking that there's not just one type of person who attends therapy, there's a lot of different reasons for why someone might say, okay, this whole therapy thing might be worth giving it a shot, giving it a try. Maybe there's just a huge significant crisis that happened. Maybe they're dealing with an extended period of anxiety or depression, coping with major life transition. And I don't know what the statistics are about therapy utilization during the pandemic, but I would imagine that some studies will be coming out kind of evaluating that. I know there's been a lot of information about evaluating how the pandemic and a lot of different aspects of it has impacted people's mental health in general. And so that could constitute as a major life transition, which we all have endured in some capacity. Maybe there's complicated family dynamics. Maybe there's problems in a relationship. Maybe you're experiencing addiction or substance abuse changes. Maybe you're just looking to improve your mental and emotional health. And you're like, I feel like I could feel even better than I do now. Maybe you want to learn more about your identity, who you are. Maybe you feel stuck, unable to move forward, all of these different things. Those are all different reasons for why people might consider trying therapy. And then on the other side of that, there's a lot of reasons, a lot of benefits to going to therapy. And so, again, this is from a Black female therapist saying why she particularly enjoys going to therapy. And it's a lot of things we've already discussed. But also, I think it can be important for some people to have support when they're not sure how to handle a situation. And then there might be that you have that confidentiality, right? So, all therapists have that confidentiality where you're trusting them with this information. There are some cases for mandatory reporting, but for the most part, you have, again, this unbiased opinion that might be removed from a situation and might be able to see it from an outsider's perspective, which can be very beneficial for some people if that is something that's not really afforded to them. And those aha moments that definitely resonated with me. I've definitely been in therapy a lot where I have thought, wow, I've been wanting to make sense of that or make that connection or that link for so long. And it's so satisfying to know that I'm not crazy or that this thing really is happening or whatever the case is, or understanding why I do things a certain way, having more clarity about that can be really helpful. And then this is another long list of other benefits of therapy too. And so there's a lot of things on here, even about trust and support and building stronger bonds with the people in your life, having this ability to cope, have communication skills, and improve kind of, how you view different situations and other things like that. So lots of different tools and strategies and things that can be gained and perspectives. And then our engagement for you all is to write about what you would hope to gain from engaging in therapeutic support. So maybe you've been to therapy before and you were hoping to have a certain experience and you didn't. So maybe you can share that, or maybe you have never attended therapy, but you would hope that you would feel a certain way or gain certain perspectives or skills or tools. Feel free to share those in the chat as well. While you're all kind of brainstorming what you hope to gain, we'll talk about some of these other questions. So a lot of them were kind of answered earlier in those slides. But Kayla, if you want to add a little bit more about your experience of why people have shared with you that they're seeking therapy, maybe how can they assess if therapy is helping them? How do you help a client kind of understand, okay, do you want to continue? Or kind of when you find a stride with a client or anything regarding that?
Yeah, like those kind of lists reflected, there are so many different reasons for considering therapy. Most commonly, I guess, just in general, I would say that people are just looking for additional support, additional, just somebody to listen, just a place to vent and get stuff out. And then also to just learn new tools and new ways of coping with different things, whether that's trauma or just current day-to-day stressors. And therapy can do all of that stuff for you. You can learn new coping things. You can really sometimes just having that listening supportive ear can be so helpful. And I think there are different ways to know if therapy is helping. Certainly, if you're feeling symptom reduction, you're feeling less anxious, depressed, etc., reasons for coming to therapy. If you're feeling like you feel very supportive and heard by your therapist, and that is feeling valuable to you to have a place to share and to get some of that out. If you notice that, relationships in your life are improving, or maybe you're just noticing that you have a little bit more capacity to handle the things that are thrown at you. Um, yeah, and I think it is important to remember too that it takes time, and that it's not a linear process. There's ups and downs that happen, and that's totally normal. And that if you don't need to feel discouraged if maybe you were feeling a little better for a while and then something happens and you feel a little worse again. But that, yeah, if there comes a point where you're feeling like maybe this isn't really helping anymore, or maybe I don't have that great of a connection with this therapist, that it's always okay to tell the therapist that, and that we want to help you find a therapist that will be a good fit.
So, kind of speaking to that, how could a current client, bring that up to a therapist that they might be saying, I don't really know if we're connecting, without like having fear of like hurting that therapist's opinion or feelings, or um, not wanting to jeopardize like being able to connect with other therapists if they're afraid that they're going to talk about them with other therapists or anything. How would you bring that up to a therapist? And would you kind of be straightforward and ask, knowing what you know about me, is there anyone else that you think might be better suited to kind of support in these ways or with these approaches?
Yeah, absolutely. I always like to make sure to tell clients very early on that, if at any point you feel like that's not the best fit, to please just let me know, and I'll never be offended. And I would really want to help assist with finding somebody who does feel like a better fit. And yeah, if you are able to identify, like maybe I'm looking for somebody who um does a little bit more of these kinds of questions, or somebody who's going to focus more on my past, or maybe somebody who's going to use this modality, that's helpful to know for then like the referrals. um, or yeah, maybe if you're hoping for somebody who is specializes in something or has more specific knowledge in a certain area. um, or yeah, even if you don't really, if you just can say like, I'm just feeling like maybe this is not quite the right fit, and I would, if you could help refer me to someone else, that would be great. um, or sometimes too, that can just feel really hard to say that to the therapist, and that's totally understandable. And so if that feels too hard, and there's like a referral specialist, or some kind of like administrative person at the agency, you could go that route too. And of course, then too, there are always clients that just stop coming, and they just don't tell you why. And that's okay, because it is hard to, be direct and say that. So if that feels like the way that you need to do it so that you can get your needs met, um, a therapist is not going to be offended by that. So
Yeah, and then another barrier in the chat is sometimes not wanting to repeat your story again. So maybe this is like the third therapist that you're trying, and you're kind of getting tired of sharing everything that you feel like you need to share. How do you assess whether you want to request that the former therapist sends over notes to a new therapist or anything like that? What are your recommendations for someone who might not want to kind of share that again? Are there other resources, and maybe like writing a narrative to have them read before the first session or anything like that?
yeah, yeah, those are all really good options. If there are therapists that work at the same agency, a lot of times they can have access to those notes, or you could request, could you spend some time talking to this therapist that I'm going to be working with and giving them a little bit of background so that I don't have to explain all of that. If you're going to like a completely new agency, or two therapists that are very completely independent of each other, you can always sign a release of information, which is very helpful to do, and then that person would have access to the diagnostic assessment and the notes, and so that they can kind of read through those things. And yeah, I have actually, I've had experiences with I had a client make a PowerPoint for me, which was kind of really cool actually. And it was, it started off as like a joke, but it was really helpful. And so yeah, because it is tiring to have to repeat the stories over and over again. So those are all good ways to help with reducing that.
Thanks, Kayla. So we'll transition to the third theme. So how do I start navigating mental health support? And so I did, once you get the PDF of these slides, you'll be able to click on this link up top about kind of what to expect when starting therapy. Lots of great resources embedded in these slides. One thing that we do want to acknowledge in that journey of navigating this beginning part is acknowledging that it can be really difficult to ask for help. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. It might be really difficult because you don't want certain people in your life to feel like they failed or that they contributed to you having problems or anything. Maybe you saw people when you were younger and growing up, or even currently struggle, and that they never ask for help or support, that that's something that they would never consider doing. And so you're kind of being modeled, okay, this is how we handle our problems. We don't. And so another can be, this idea of severe independence, of like you always have to go it alone. You can't allow anyone else to help you. Maybe you did try before and you didn't get what you wanted, which is absolutely valid and discouraging, but that can, again, make it even more difficult to ask for help again. You might associate asking for help with being a weakness because of other culturalization, normalized things kind of in society telling you, what is okay, what's not okay, what a strong person is, and what that includes. Maybe you had to take care of people when it wasn't your responsibility, all these other things. Maybe you're the person that everyone comes to, and so it's hard for you to come to other people. All of those different things can be barriers and make it difficult to ask for help. So this is just a little bit about the first step of finding a therapist. So I won't read all of this out loud. You can go back and go through it. This has been kind of my personal approach uh, to thinking about starting, is first sitting down with a notebook or maybe whatever thing helps you process, and thinking about why you want support, what that support might look like, what it might feel like, maybe writing down certain things that are going on in your life that you'd like to process more and talk about with someone else, maybe what's worked in the past to support your mental health wellness, maybe things that didn't work. So you can maybe even tell the therapist that right up front, of like, okay, um I tried DBT, I really didn't like it, or whatever the case is. And so that can be helpful too. And then assessing if you're willing to be able to make changes in your life too, of like therapy very much can be what you make of it. And sometimes when you really need therapy, you might not be in the best headspace for all of these things too, which is totally okay also. There's a lot of different directories, which we'll show in the next slide here, where you can do all those different toggling, find different locations if you want it to be telehealth, if you want it to be there's a lot of different ways to get specific to find the perfect person. But if you're like, that's way too much work, there also are a lot of quiz-like features too, where you can just answer a few questions and then they'll be able to say, oh, here are some people, read their bios, read about their experiences, see if they seem like a good fit. Here's their contact information. So there's a lot of different ways where some of them they'll have like a contact form, and you can send your information, include your email, and they'll respond via email or call you if you say it's okay to call you. So that's another thing too. They're very respectful of that communication, of making sure that if it's not safe or comfortable to leave a voicemail, you don't want other people who have access to your phone to hear that. They're very cognizant of your privacy too. And so You typically have your consultation or kind of like an informational meeting that is short, but typically between, you can tell me if I'm wrong, Kayla, but it can be 15 minutes, it can be 30, it could also be 45. It really depends on the person. And kind of typically in those interest forms, it's good to have that brainstorming process because they'll kind of ask, what are you hoping to gain? Or like, how can we help you? Just to have a little bit of context for that. And then before the consultation meeting, you can come up with questions to ask them. So you're assessing their fit for what you need also. So you don't have to start services with the very first therapist that you find or that you connect with. You can say, hey, I'm going to continue looking. And again, like Kayla said before, they'll be completely understanding of that also. And then we do have a few links if you want to explore them later about kind of finding the right therapist for you that's very tailored to what your needs are, maybe even looking for particular red flags or things that might be red flags to you of like, okay, I don't think that this person will be able to support me, or there's some things about them that um, might feel more invalidating than validating, or other things too, to be aware of. So anything you want to add about that process, Kayla? And I know that that's kind of looking on your own, and you can go through your insurance and have your insurance provide suggestions. And then if you're seeking services through a particular organization like face to face, that might be different too.
Yeah, no, this is a great way to start. And I think, yeah, what you mentioned about the insurance piece is always really helpful too. Just, I mean, the insurance, if you call like the number on the back of their card, they're maybe not going to be quite as helpful with like, this is a specific person who I think might be a good fit for you, but at least they will be able to tell you these are people or places that we know your insurance will accept. So sometimes that's good to do, if you found someone who you feel like you like, then to just double check with your insurance so there isn't any big surprises. Um, yeah, I guess the other thing I would add is just asking people too, if you have friends or family members who see a therapist, asking them for recommendations. And if it's maybe like a conflict of interest where the therapist couldn't see you because they also see your sister or whatever, they maybe that therapist would have a recommendation for somebody good. Yeah.
And then, as promised, here are a bunch of therapist directories. So, one of my favorites personally is Inclusive Therapists. They have a really, really great directory as well. I've also personally tried BetterHelp, so those are ones that I can vouch for. The others are not totally sure, but I would recommend checking these out if any of them seem interesting to you. So once you get the PDF, you'll be able to click directly on each of these links, or you can type them into Google too and find them. So they'll have a lot of different features that you can make very specific to what you're looking for. And then another thing that I wanted to mention is that, it might be really important to you to have a culturally sensitive therapist. And so these are some of the different characteristics of a culturally sensitive therapist. So these might be things that you can pick up on during the session. It might be things that you turn into questions of like, how do you think mental health symptoms show up differently for, different groups of people, or for people who are Asian, if I'm, Asian American. Um, so those are some things to assess of, are you able, like this identity of mine is very important to me. Are you able to make sure that that is integrated into how we're approaching therapy? Because it can come off as very tone deaf if that isn't considered or incorporated. So those are just some things to think about too that we wanted to make sure is included in your assessment of the right therapist. We also wanted to acknowledge, while we have this link, therapy for every budget, there might not be, your budget might not be included in that link. And so we wanted to be honest that it just might not be a reality that you can afford therapy right now. And so know that there are a lot of other mental health support kind of resources and ways to engage in that outside of a therapeutic setting. But there's other kind of strategies too, with checking in with student centers at local colleges. Sometimes they have free or kind of flexible offerings and things, to maybe community health centers. Maybe you lean on help, free hotlines or text lines. I know I'm a part of Thrive, which is a crisis line as well. So you can kind of look up all of those and see. There's also a lot of mental health apps. Sometimes you can get those through your insurance. Lots of different books and other guidelines online too, if there's someone that you know of. I know I lean on Brené Brown a lot too. So those can be in the form of books or even podcasts. Now there's a lot of therapists that have that podcasts where they talk about different issues that, they very much would have maybe given that exact same advice in a therapy setting too. So there's other ways to kind of access that support in other ways too. Is there anything you want to add to that, Kayla?
Yeah, those are all really great ones. Crisis text line is a really good resource. That's and they can then usually will have a lot of good resources they can connect you with. And then just another person that comes to mind thinking about good podcasts and people is Glennon Doyle. She has a new podcast that's really great, and they talk a lot about topics that would come up in therapy.
Great, thank you. I just added the crisis text line website to the chat as well. I'll also include Thrive. And again, yeah, they're also great resources to be able to connect you with other support systems if you later decide that that would be helpful. Okay, even more resources. This is particularly if you're looking for a BIPOC or Black, Indigenous person of color who is a therapist as well. So there's a lot of different directories to go through too. So you can find one that resonates with you and see if you can get connected. And then we also wanted to ask you all, again, another opportunity for engagement. We might have to kind of go through these next ones a little quick to make sure we have time for the rest, because the time flew by. We only have about 18 more minutes left or so. But for the attendees, what are indicators in your life that therapy may be worth trying? So those are some things to just ponder, think about. You can share in the chat if you would like. Sometimes people view it as kind of a last resort where they're like, I don't know what else to do anymore. So I guess I'll try this because everything I've been trying to do hasn't been working. So that might be your answer as well too, which is very real. But we kind of addressed some of these too, about where to start, including some of those questionnaires, some things that kind of cut out the middleman a little bit of like, okay, how can I just find someone in my area and see if I can get support as soon as possible, because I don't know how much longer I can wait. But some things, Kayla, that you might want to talk about are questions to consider asking a therapist during a consultation meeting, maybe assessing how much to share, maybe from your perspective too, or sometimes people feel like they have to share their entire life story in that first session or in the consultation meeting. And then again, a little bit more if you want to talk about assessing fit, and knowing that they can always check in about whether it's working or not, if things are going well, if there's any adjustments that need to be made. And we kind of already talked about that last question too. So any of those that kind of stand out to you?
Yeah, I would say, for a consult meeting, definitely don't feel like you need to like give out your whole life story. I think you can kind of stick to the highlights of reasons why you're kind of feeling like you're coming to therapy. And then, save that deeper dive for maybe the initial intake diagnostic assessment, the consultation meeting. Other things I think you can ask would be, what kind of approaches does the therapist use? What is their educational background? I think you can always ask, have you been in therapy yourself? Because that can be helpful to know. And I think is important, for therapists who have been in therapy, can ask, how do you, what would a typical session look like? Asking about insurance, asking about yeah, specific identities that are important to you. We have a lot of clients who will specifically request to work with a BIPOC therapist or a therapist who identifies as trans or queer or yeah, any other specific identities that are important to you. And then, yeah, related to that, I would certainly say that that is a huge indicator for if the therapist is a good fit, is if you feel like they are, I mean, certainly at the very least respectful of and acknowledging and considerate of your identities. And then, you know, obviously the hope too is that it is more than that, and that you feel like they are very supportive um, and yeah, honestly too, sometimes it's just a vibe thing. Like somebody you just don't connect super well with them, and that's okay too. It doesn't really need to be like this huge, deep reason. Sometimes you just don't hit it off with somebody, and that's okay too.
Yeah, thank you. We'll transition to the last theme here, which is how do I do the work and make the most of therapy? So, a little bit about what doing the work might mean for you. It might mean that you're making a healthier choice. Maybe you're practicing until you get better, working through your trauma. Maybe you're being honest about how you feel when you haven't done that in the past. Setting boundaries can be a huge part of doing the work and honoring those boundaries consistently, using the resources that you have access to, recognizing there's change to be made, self compassion when you don't get it right. I think that is a big part too, where people just focus on like the grittiness and the resilience, but it's also how can we extend kindness to ourselves and forgive ourselves for certain things. Noticing when you're triggered and using self regulation skills, going from feeling stuck to feeling empowered. So, there's a lot of different ways in what doing the work might mean for you. Related to that might be things of healing. So I won't read through all of these, but there might be some realizations that come with your healing journey. Some that kind of stick out to me is, I no longer have to fix people. I don't have to tuck away my true feelings. I don't have to hide parts of myself to be liked. So, a lot of those kind of realizations and things that we've been taught and kind of unlearning and relearning things that are more in alignment with our values and our goals and how we want to engage in our life as well too. Yeah. Again, that healing journey is very unique to everyone. And so, another thing that we really wanted to highlight, if someone tells you that they're seeing a therapist, and I also kind of like this because if you're telling someone else that you're seeing a therapist and you get these different kind of responses, you can categorize them in your head of like, oh, that was really encouraging, or oh, that was actually very judgmental, instead of what they say is fact, right? So we can start to kind of categorize them too and think about like, okay, this person, may have had certain experiences that will lead them to having this reaction about this, but it doesn't inherently mean that it's necessarily true. And so some of the encouraging things that can be said in response to someone saying that they're seeing a therapist is, you're taking action. I'm proud of you. That's a major step. You're brave for taking it. That therapy can be really helpful. I'm here if you need to talk about it. So all of those things can be really encouraging, instead of saying things like, why would you do that? I thought you were happy. People who are happy can definitely still seek therapy. There's a lot of different reasons. Or saying, you can just pray about it, which I think is something that we hear a lot. And it's not to say that praying is bad at all. It's just that the word just is a big one too, of like, you can pray and also go to therapy. And so that's something that can be used to be very kind of invalidating and dismissive of people's experiences of like, oh, if you just pray about it, it'll go away. You don't have to do anything else. But that can just be in addition to other things that you're doing. Or saying, what do you need therapy for? And being very intrusive about that, or saying things like, you don't seem like you need therapy, or you just have to pull it together, be strong, implying that you're not strong if you seek therapy, all of these other things. So those are just things to consider and think about, because you might want to engage other people or let others know that you are in therapy. And then we do have a question about healing and support and what that means for you. So, again, that can just be a pondering question that you think about here in the next few minutes while we discuss kind of the last few questions and prepare to wrap up. Um, but these are the last few questions here in terms of preparing for that first therapy session, being intentional about engaging with therapeutic support. So, again, kind of what you get out of it is partly also what you put into it and what you can do outside of therapy that might contribute positively to growth and mental health wellness. Deciding who to tell, when to tell, how to tell others in your life that you're in therapy. So, all of those different things. So, you can kind of jump around, Kayla, if you'd like, of things that you would like to share about this theme.
Yeah, I'll try to not take up too much time here. I think, for that, before the first session, you can just think about ways for you to be open and honest in a way that still feels safe for you. Sometimes, people will come and they will disclose trauma and things that have happened to them because you will probably be asked about that, but they will maybe give a lot of details or really go into it a lot, and it can feel like too much, too fast, too soon, and then you leave feeling really icky and you don't want to ever do it again. And hopefully the therapist will help prevent that from happening, but that's just something to think about too, is that in that first one, when the therapist is kind of trying to do the diagnostic assessment, to pace yourself and to remember, like, you can give kind of facts about some things that have happened, but you don't need to always go into so many details. And then, yeah, just being intentional about engagement with therapeutic support. I think it's important to be honest with yourself and be honest with your therapist. If you're feeling like you have to lie to your therapist, that's, you're not going to get as much out of it as you would otherwise. Or if, as you're just withholding things, that's common, but, to be honest with yourself about if you're doing that, and then you can always tell the therapist, like, hey, I've been holding back a little bit. Um, and then things to do outside that to contribute positively. Um, I always, encourage mindfulness, meditation, breath work, especially, if there's been a particularly heavy session, doing something like that. Maybe your therapist might help you do that at the end to wrap up. There's always really good books that you can read, and sometimes your therapist might say, like, let's read this together and go through it. And yeah, and just making sure that you have support too can be helpful. Somebody that knows that you're going through therapy. If you feel like there's a safe person in your life to tell that can be helpful. Making sure that you're getting some movement in your life and some nutrition, that can be helpful. And then, yeah, as far as deciding who you're going to tell, you know, just remember that it's your journey and you can tell as many or as little people as you want to. And I think that lots of times you'll be surprised that people are starting to be more and more supportive, but you can encounter people who are not, and that can be related to generational or cultural reasons. But this is your own journey and you don't need to justify it to anybody. So
Thanks, Kayla. So we are kind of reaching the finish line here. I wanted to include contact information. Again, Hafia wasn't able to join us, but you can still feel free to reach out to her, visit her website, Grounded in Wellness, and also Kayla's information as well too, if you'd like to reach out. And then we do have some other resources that you might be interested in. I know some people in the beginning, when they're introducing themselves, said that they want some more information on how to talk to someone that they care about getting treatment for their mental health. So there's a specific resource about that. Otherwise, I hope that we shared some information that you can relay to them throughout this webinar as well. more resources about grounding, about strength-based approaches, equal access, getting matched with therapists, lots of different things to explore. So I'm keeping an eye on the chat. I'm not seeing too many questions pull in, but if there's anything now at the end that you would like to, we'll hang out for a few more minutes here and answer those questions if they come up. If not, no pressure. And then we just want to encourage everyone to stay connected with us. You can always live chat with an advocate. That can be another option. That's not a substitute for mental health support at all, but can again be a starting point for getting connected to resources. We also have a 24-hour crisis resource line that you can call. And then we are all over social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Our YouTube channel is where we post the recordings of all of our webinars. So this one included will be on that channel. So you can feel free to subscribe. Just go to youtube.com/c/women's advocates. And then you can always email us as well. We'll be sending out that follow-up email with all of the resources and information. I'll also in the chat send some more information about requesting a certificate. We also really encourage you to fill out the survey if you want to provide some information about if you liked this webinar, if you like this approach of kind of more conversational instead of other approaches. Just let us know what you like, didn't like, want to see in the future, any ideas for other topics that you want to have covered. Feel free to include that. I'm also including information about a job opening that we have at Women's Advocates. So if you're interested in outreach administrative assistant, it's a part-time position, or if you know of someone who is, you can feel free to apply. Seeing lots of gratitude in the chat too. So thank you for being here. And is there anything that you want to add that you feel like you didn't get a chance to say or share, Kayla?
Not that I can think of, but please, anybody, if you have any other questions or things that you want to ask specifically to me, feel free to reach out. And yeah, it was an honor to be here today. I hope that I helped answer some questions, and I was not expecting to be the only panelist, so I hope I did okay with that. And and yeah, I would love to hear any feedback from anybody too. So thank you.
Yep, thank you. We adjust and we adapt. So thanks for hanging in there, Kayla. And hopefully what I said made sense to you because I was expecting to just be a moderator. So hopefully that it was beneficial and yes, encouraging for you all to continue to have conversations about therapy in your lives. But we hope to see you at the next webinar next week. And other than that, I will go ahead and stop the recording.